Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, Joe Biden's term as U.S. president will begin with a request for Americans to wear face masks. That's what the president-elect said in an interview with CNN. Appearing with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, Mr. Biden said he would waste no time in implementing his COVID-19 strategy. Unsurprisingly, given the surge in COVID-19 cases across America, the coronavirus pandemic took center stage, with Mr. Biden saying part of his plan would be to stop its spread. But Mr. Biden is, of course, yet to assume office. So what about the incumbents, you might ask? Well, not a pipsqueak from Donald Trump about the COVID crisis. Instead, he's traveling to Georgia this weekend to campaign for two Republicans competing in the Senate runoff races there. Well, for more on that, I'm joined now via WebEx by the U.S. Republican strategist, Gregg Swenson, who is also a partner at the Brigg Macadam Investment Bank. Greg, good to see you again. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And of course, America's health system struggling to cope with what's been described as a terrifying surge in coronavirus cases. President-elect Joe Biden announcing plans to tackle the crisis, including asking everyone to mask up for 100 days. Seems perfectly reasonable, doesn't it? Unless you are a Republican who supports Donald Trump.
No, I think if you really look at the details of what Vice President Biden or President-elect Biden is proposing, it's all very consistent with what President Trump has already done. The only change is making masks mandatory to some degree, which I don't think will really fly in the U.S. But what's interesting is 93% of Americans are wearing masks. So it's not like there's some, massive rejection of masks, half the party voted, or half the country voted for Trump, half the country voted for Biden. And yet, even in last spring, it was in the high 70s, low 80s in terms of percentage of people wearing masks. And now it's clicking in, in the low 90s. So I don't think that this 100-day mandate is anything but political, and it corresponds or coincides with, a well-known metric in presidential politics, which is the 100-day, the 100-day metric where there's a lot of analysis about the president's first term. So I think that's more political, and I don't think it'll really move the needle much in terms of addressing the pandemic.
Well, to be honest, Greg, I beg to differ rather dramatically, from you, because, what Joe Biden is suggesting or is saying that he's going to do is a big departure from Donald Trump's approach, which at best has been inconsistent, particularly when it comes to mask wearing. He held huge events at the White House. He went to rallies where people were not mandated to wear masks. And Joe Biden is saying that in every single federal building, in public transport, it's going to become the rule rather than the exception.
Yeah, and if that improves the safety protocols in the White House or in federal buildings in Washington, great. Although my guess is, I haven't been to Washington in some time because of the travel restrictions, but my guess is just about every building in Washington has some sort of mandatory mask wearing. Now, the president, because he's the president, behaved differently. He had to maintain some sense of optimism and leadership, but that doesn't mean that he's against mask wearing. And again, it doesn't really matter as much because the behavior is indicating that. That again, 93% are wearing masks sometimes, and 78% are wearing masks virtually all the time when they're in any sort of public forum. So yeah, I just don't think that it's any different dramatically or materially different from what the president has done. What his messaging wasn't perfect back in April and May, as we know, though. I thought those press conferences were confusing and weren't very helpful. But in terms of what he's actually done with delivering ventilators, delivering masks, delivering PPE, and then of course the best outcome, which is a very American thing, is coming up with a vaccine instead of hiding from it, and being fearful of it. Let's just kick it in the face. And that's what Operation Warp Speed did. And now you've got 3 vaccines that are ready to go. and especially here in the UK, which has already approved it.
Well, I mean, as I said, I beg to differ. Of course, in the middle of the pandemic, let's not forget that Donald Trump is still the incumbent president of the United States. In the last few days, not a pipsqueak, this enormous surge in coronavirus cases in America, not a pipsqueak from the president, and he's still banging on about his alleged victory in the elections and this phantom fraud that he claims took place. And of course, to add to that, the president is due to arrive in the state of Georgia this weekend to campaign for the Republicans competing in those two Senate runoff cases. How is Mr. Trump's appearance likely to play?
Well, I think it will surely help the candidates running in the runoffs, the Senate runoffs in Georgia. And the president's a great campaigner, and he actually enjoys it. And I think, you saw that in the rallies leading up to the election. There's a massive enthusiasm gap between President Trump and the Republicans versus the Democrats. So I think the president will probably help those candidates. I imagine that's the purpose, and that's important because I think the Republicans really want to hold the Senate. But the president campaigning is not unusual. This is not a surprise to anybody. The fact that he hasn't talked about the corona situation or the COVID or the increase in cases is because he's really been focused on delivering vaccines, Operation Warp Speed, where he mobilized the private sector and supported it with federal resources. We expected with winter coming that cases would go up. There's no doubt about that. And they've obviously gone up just in the last month. But what's really the important metric to keep an eye on is the fatality rates, which are down significantly from the spring, and the case fatality rates. But naturally, with the spread of the virus, with more testing, you're going to see case rates go up. Fortunately, it's been more in the younger demographic where they don't have the outcomes, but on one hand. But on the other hand, there's still problems in the care homes. 40% of the fatalities are in care homes. So this is not, obviously it's not good news, but I don't think the president wants to dwell on it. He's not running for re-election right now, so it's not a political motivation, but he's always struck the right balance between addressing it, taking it seriously, but not succumbing to the hype and letting it control you. And I think he's done a good job. That's why the economy has recovered so well, especially in the red states. So I think that optimism and that correct balance between addressing the issues, which he's obviously done with the outcomes of the federal government's reaction to the pandemic, in terms of deliverables, and again, especially with Operation Warp Speed and the 3 vaccines. But I think he'll also try to maintain a confidence that the country will emerge from this, and so far so good in terms of the V-shaped recovery.
Well, I don't know how he's going to do that if he's taking off in the middle of a raging pandemic that is just growing by leaps and bounds, and arguably going to hold a rally in Georgia. But let's talk about Georgia, because of course therein lies another Donald Trump contradiction. There is of course this incredible dilemma, dichotomy, paradox at the center of this visit, which is how, can you call into question so radically the electoral system in Georgia and at the same time urge people to vote for 2, senators there? And we've got about a minute.
Yeah, he's got to strike a delicate balance, because we don't want to take the eye off the ball. And I think the focus, in my hopes, would be on the Senate candidates, because it's so critical to keep the Senate and to win those elections. Remember, in the general election on November 3rd, the Republicans won by just about every metric imaginable. They won. There were 27 congressional races that were considered toss-ups. The Republicans won all 27 of them. They only lost 1 Senate seat, where the polls and the press had the Senate flipping to the Democrats comfortably, and even having pickups in the House. State legislatures stayed red or turned red. So look, I think the president will campaign. He likes campaigning. I think he'll be a boost for these candidates. I hope he just stays focused on that. I think, but he's got to run that delicate balance between that and trying to explore some of the issues around voter fraud.
Gregg, it's always a tremendous pleasure talking with you. Thank you ever so much. Gregg Swenson is a U.S. Republican strategist who is also a partner at the Brigg Macadam Investment Bank. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.